Again, my name is Dawn McCooey, and our session today will be recorded. So you will be able to visit back with any of the information that you're gathering. You'll also receive an email on Monday that will include the bios of the presenters today. It will include some links and information that we share with you. You'll be getting an email as well with that information. Still, it's a good idea to grab a pen and paper. There might be something here that might be most immediately available information to you that you want right away. So we want you to have that handy. Okay, so that's me with a different haircut. You know what's happening with this COVID pandemic. So welcome, I'm Dawn McCooey, business advisor and entrepreneur in residence with Women's Enterprise Center. A couple of tips about the Zoom chat. Easiest way to connect with us during the webinar. If you have a question or you want to communicate with us, please, right on the bottom, if you hold your mouse along the bottom of your screen, you'll see something that looks like a conversation bubble. So just click on that and you can type in your question or comment. Carrie Lee Auger, who's our Skills Development Manager, will be managing our Q&A today. So you will have an opportunity to ask questions. Okay. So use that. You can use the Q&A, but especially chat. I am delighted to introduce our panelists today. We have for you in this HR edition of the Strength in Numbers, I'm first going to introduce Tanja Halsall. Tanja in Kelowna provides consulting services to various local businesses through her consulting company, Potentia Human Resources and Engagement Consulting. She's also an adjunct professor at the Faculty of Management at UBC Okanagan. Tanja is a lifelong learner. She holds a CPHR and SHRM SCP designation, a master's degree in leadership, post-diploma in HR management, and initially began her commitment to learning while working towards her Bachelor of Education. Tanja draws on her 30+ years of progressive management, operations, and strategic human resources experience to support local businesses in developing exceptional people, culture, and leadership practices, and in order to achieve exceptional results. Welcome, Tanja. I would also like to introduce Charlene Cleary. Charlene is a lawyer and a mediator with over 11 years of legal experience, working mostly in the areas of employment law, business law, and estate law. She operates her own practice in the West Shore of Victoria. Running her own firm and business means Charlene understands some of the satisfaction and the challenges of running a business, especially during these difficult times. She's delighted to try and be of service on this webinar today to help like-minded female entrepreneurs. And we're delighted to have you, Charlene and Tanja. Thank you so much for coming on board to address this very important human resources webinar with our focus today on human resources and employment. So what we're going to cover today is a little bit about Women's Enterprise Center and how we help, a little bit about some government support updates. We have some questions that came in, and I'll introduce you to Melanie Rook in just a minute as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tanja, keeping employees gauged. And then we're going to turn it over to Charlene Cleary on the legal side. And then there's that great opportunity. We're going to save time for you to ask your questions. So thank you. We've got women entrepreneurs from all over BC today for this webinar. So for those of you not familiar with Women's Enterprise Center, we help women business owners to realize their business potential through business loans up to $150,000, professional advice and resources, skills training, such as these webinars, mentoring, and most importantly, in this time, a supportive community. We're here for you. So thank you for joining us. Ways that we can support you right now. Women's Enterprise Center has a web page on our website, womensenterprise.ca, or as you can see from this slide, wec.ca, and it's called COVID-19. We're keeping up to date and connecting you with the resources that can help you personally as well as in your business. So check that out. We've got some great programs and supports for you. Here's a thank you, Carrie Lee. Here's what this looks like. You'll see this on our website, right there in About Us, COVID-19 resources and support. We're keeping that updated. One of the most important links for you, we want you to go to is canada.ca. Melanie's going to talk a little bit about that in just a few moments. So lots of great resources, information, ways that we can support you. We're also supporting our loans clients through 3 months, April, May, and June, with 0 interest on the loans, as well as an opportunity to defer the principal payments as well. So we're working hard, Melanie is connecting with government officials every week to relay your questions, share your concerns with the people that are making a difference and creating policies and feeding that directly to the government. So thank you. We have a whole webinar on this, so I'm going to only touch very, very briefly. The key messages that we're wanting you to take in at this difficult time, and these recordings are available on our website. We want you to focus on what it is that you can control. In a difficult or challenging time, there are some things that you cannot. Focus on those things that you can control. Follow public health authorities. Manage your cash flow. We've opened up our webinars free of charge in the financial fitness webinars. You can access all of those from our website. This is the time to be paying attention. Practice your negotiation skills, build resilience and innovation, and create an action plan. We've got details on all of those tips on our other webinar recordings. Check them out. So we're going to talk about government support updates, and we had 3 questions specifically that came, and Melanie Roop, who is our Director of Loans and Advisory Services, is on our call today as well. And so I'm going to start with the first question that came in. Someone presented that as of mid-March, I had to reduce my one full-time employee who was still on a probationary period to work part-time, so only 2 days a week. I didn't completely lay off this employee. Would I be able to apply for the wage subsidy to bring the employee back into full-time or 75% status, given that my revenue has decreased substantially? Or does the employee need to be laid off and not work for 14 days before I qualify? Melanie, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn, and thanks everybody for being on the call today. As Dawn said, I am on a call daily with the federal government, and it's been really helpful to look at specific situations. And there's often these kind of specific situation questions that come up. And the best route to get your question answered is to go straight to the government. There are other people that can help, and certainly our panelists today probably have some insight to this. So based on my understanding of the new programs, the key here is that does the employee need to be laid off and not work for 14 days to qualify? So it depends on which program you're looking at, but certainly if you want to, the employee wants to apply for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which is the $2,000 a month, then they are looking for a layoff and not having worked in the 14 days prior. But with all of these new programs that are coming out, they're constantly changing and trying to get the information out to the public. So the best resources is to go to the canada.ca website, but also specifically any questions that are related or that are being processed by Canada Revenue Agency is to call into Canada Revenue Agency. They now have 2,000 staff on to take calls, and they're saying that the response time at CRA is much reduced. So specific questions like this, go to CRA, call them and ask them specifically. We also have a couple of other questions as well, which I can respond to. But again, it's going to CRA and ask them specifically about your situation. And I think some of the other information will come up on the call today because it's regarding the wages. Do you want to go on to the other questions, or do you want me to talk about?
This second question is, can I hire my children 15 and 17 for wage subsidy?
Yes, so we have that situation in our household as well. My husband has a business and a son who's just finished first year university. So this is another CRA question potentially, maybe our panelists will have, but my understanding is that the wage subsidy is looking at your employees before COVID struck and then keeping those employees on the wage subsidy. Doesn't necessarily apply to hiring new employees afterwards, but that's something to clarify. There's also a calculator where you can go through your scenario and see potentially what the wage subsidy might be.
Great, thank you. And the third question is, can I hire someone in a completely new position that my company had not previously employed and received subsidies? Could they still receive the subsidy?
Yeah, I think that ties back to the previous is, I'm not sure if the wage subsidies are applying just to people who were employed previous to COVID. And that I'm not clear on. So maybe our panelists would know that one.
Okay. And then you can see from this slide here as well, some of the upcoming information. April 27th, that is Monday. Applications are open for that Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. We also want, because we've got lots of daycare providers, clients throughout the province, and April 30th is the deadline for licensed daycare providers to apply for that temporary emergency funding specific to licensed daycares. And as Carrie Lee mentioned this morning, more details are rolling out now about the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. So, you know, staying tuned to some of that information.
Yeah, I have some information on that one, which because this has been a big one for small businesses. Where they have commercial rent and the landlords were not forgiving any rent, or some were and some weren't. So what the federal government is doing is the program has been agreed to by all the provinces across Canada to lower commercial rent by 75% for April, May, and June. And the government is giving a forgivable loan of 50% to the landlords who participate in the program. And the landlord then has to cover the remaining 25%. So this is for tenants who are paying less than $50,000 in rent per month and who have experienced a minimum of 75% drop in revenue. It also applies to not-for-profits and for charities. So potentially that's going to be some much needed relief for businesses. If I could also just pop in quickly and just want to say, now as these programs are starting to come out, we see businesses that may qualify for the $40,000 loan, which is the Canada Emergency Business Account. But if you are paying yourself in dividends, or if you are sole proprietor and you receive business income as your personal income, you wouldn't qualify for that CEBA loan. I'm thinking at that, if that's the case and you're needing financing, then the next step is to look at Women's Enterprise Center, because our loan program is still open, and we have a business loan information session running on Tuesday that you can register for on our website. Begin to put your growth plan or your business plan together, your 2-year cash flow projections, and put together a request for financing and start considering that application. We look at 2 scenarios, and that is, one is where the economy is going to start up in Q3, so the summertime sometime, and continue to gradually recover. That would be scenario 1. And the second scenario to plan for is where the businesses start to reopen in the Q3 being the summer, but then there's a resurgence of the virus, which causes everything to shut down again or be somewhat shut down. So then things will not be growing steadily as expected. What will you do then in your business if you have to shut down again and then gradually ramp up? So think of those 2 scenarios when you're planning for financing, and look at applying to Women's Enterprise Center if you're not qualifying for the other programs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you.
In a nutshell, I really want to hear what the panelists have to say today, because there's lots of great information needed there.
Terrific. Thank you, Melanie.
My pleasure.
Okay. So we're going to lead off with Tanja. And Tanja, I'm going to pass this next session into to your expert hands. And Tanja, again, Chief People Officer with Potentia. Thank you, Tanja.
You're welcome. Good morning, everybody. It's interesting because usually when I'm in front of a crowd or a number of people, I'm standing in front and I have my pen in my hand and I'm talking with my hands and I can see everybody. So I have to say this is a different experience for me. So I'm absolutely honored to be here and provide some tips and tricks and some perspective on leading your people during a challenging time. And, you know, first, thank you so much, Dawn. It's an absolute privilege and honor to support the Women's Enterprise Center. And Charlene, and you and I had a great chat the other day with Dawn. And it's great to meet you and collaborate with you on this. So thank you. So really, like I said, I'm going to provide in the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to provide a few tips and tricks and things, food for thought, things to think about. Carrie Lee is behind the scenes advancing the slides. So thank you so much, Carrie Lee. I think, this slide, we're all in this together. And I think this is a really good time. If we move to the next slide, this is a really good time to extend appreciation for all of our teams who have got us here today. You know, I think we all definitely need a virtual high five. If somebody would have said to us as entrepreneurs, you know, in 1 week, you're going to have to close your doors, work from home, set up your IT, your technology, engage with your teams in a different way than you've ever done before. There's going to be some challenges. A few of your people are sick. Traditionally speaking, 40% of people might not be here. Ready, go. We all would have looked at each other and went, oh my goodness, can we do this? I don't know if we can. And so we've done it. So I want to say, you know, it's been challenging for businesses for sure. And for people, we've had to really change the way that we look at things. We've had to change the way that we work. So I just think it's a really good time for us to right now pause and think about how far you and your teams have come and really honor everybody's contributions. So I would challenge everybody, maybe after we get off this call, is to extend appreciation to your people if you haven't been on a daily basis already, and let them know of the impact that they've made individually. So, here we are. So we're in this position, and what I've been saying to clients is the leadership opportunities right now are endless, right? And traditionally, when we think about leadership, we always feel like we have to have all of the answers. And so what I'm here to say is we don't. I think leaders need to engage our teams, right? We need to engage our teams. We need to engage our coaches, our inner coaches, and ask our people really thoughtful questions to help enable them to contribute to what's going on here. So, I think for those of us, or for those people who are used to a bit of a different style where you're used to telling people what to do, or people are used to getting direct instruction, this is a time really for us to engage our inner coach and to start engaging our people. And so what that looks like on a day-to-day, it's about asking people questions to think critically for themselves. And really what happens is they end up your people will contribute to a higher level if they are the people that are coming up with the ideas, if they're involved in the process, if they have the opportunity to contribute at a higher level. Usually what we see, almost always, is people are very highly engaged. And they feel a sense of ownership. And really that's fantastic as a leader to provide your people with that sense of ownership and contribution. So the other thing, so I guess feel free to contact me. My contact information is going to be sent along, as Dawn said. So I can provide you with lots of coaching questions. So if you want to engage in a conversation on what that might look like to a greater level, feel free to reach out, okay? The other thing that I want to talk about, vulnerability. So vulnerability is not a weakness. It is our greatest measure of courage. And so I want to share with you a story. So this morning at 8 o'clock, I had a leader call me, so a director, call me, and she said, I have an employee who is very stressed right now. She's not performing. And I went into this conversation and I thought I was going to have a really good, solid, encouraging conversation. She said it went totally sideways. And the person ended up in tears, okay? And she was very vulnerable with me and she was sharing what happened. And so the advice, so, an hour later, but in a nutshell, the advice really I gave her is reconnect with that employee, be honest, right? Let them know that, it was my intention to have a really great conversation and talk about your strengths and maybe your challenges and to support you. And I understand that after our conversation yesterday, I started to reflect and I thought that's not really what happened. And I want to regroup with you today. And so I really want to make things right. And so I talked to her about being vulnerable, taking ownership of the situation, take ownership of what happened, and humanize yourself to your people. People know that we're not perfect. We make mistakes as well. So I encourage you to be vulnerable with your people and to be human. And really, again, we are all in this together. And I think, we can accomplish a lot if we take that approach. Okay. So the other thing to look at is, we've all seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is just a really good time to sort of ground ourselves for a moment and take a look and see that really the needs along the bottom, air, water, food, shelter, these are basic needs that normally people that we are working with would have, right? And in order to realize, people's potential and the best that they can be at that tip, we need everything along the way. And right now people are suffering with people don't always have all of those needs. So I think it's really important that we stop, pause, get to know our people, get to know what's happening with them on a day-to-day. We think that people working from home, sometimes they might enjoy that. I will be honest and say there's a lot of people working from home right now that are more stressed than ever, right? They've got kids that are on a computer. One person I was talking to today, their child is having a Zoom field trip today. They have another child that's in school and will be on Zoom. Their husband is working from home, they're working from home, and they don't have daycare there. So I think it's just important for us to recognize what's happening with some of our people. I was talking to somebody else yesterday, and they have a family that actually works with them, and they're actually staying in a motel right now. They've lost their home, and so they actually dropped off a food basket. It gives me shivers, right? They dropped a food basket off at the motel that this family is staying. Husband, wife, and 2 children in a 1-bedroom motel. So I'm throwing that out there because I think there's an assumption that we know our people, and I would offer right now that this is a time to get to know our people more than we ever have before. Okay, so moving to the next one, you know, and tying directly into that, the Mental Health Commission of Canada has 13 psychosocial factors that are fantastic to contribute to. And if we can actually just go right to the next slide on this one. These are the 13 factors, and it's really good to have awareness of what these are. So basically what this organization is saying is, if we take care of these 13 things for our employees, magic happens, right? So if our people are engaged, if they feel a sense of balance, if there's an appropriate workload management, if they have the opportunity to grow, this is how people can reach their potential. So when we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have that peak at the top. So if we help our people take care of these 13 factors, then they can reach their potential. And I think, you know, Charlene's going to talk a little bit about working from home and these types of things. And it's different right now. So I think we just need to make sure that we're honoring that and find new and creative and innovative ways to honor these 13 factors, which will help our people.
All right.
So I think that's it. I think that's it for me. So I would say thank you so much. Over to Charlene for now, and then we'll pop back at the end for questions.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you so much. And you know, your opening statement, if someone had told us that we'd be in this position, you know, it is this opportunity to reflect and see how far we have all come.
Yeah.
So thank you. And thank you for those great tips.
You're welcome.
Charlene, let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. As Tanya said, I'll just echo her comments about feeling that we are all in this together, and that I'm honored to be here to help like-minded female entrepreneurs to help get through not just this time, but just running a business. And mostly what we're talking about today is people, because for many of us, what we do is our people. It's our people. For us that are in service-oriented businesses, and even for people who aren't. So I'm going to try and, like, I could talk for 3 days straight about employment law because I love it so much, but I have 10 minutes. So what I've tried to do is think of a couple of topics that would, you know, be relevant on any day of the week, but certainly ones that are maybe a little bit more relevant to many of us who are trying to make their way through the pandemic that we're all living through. So the first one would be something we're all hearing about, we're all talking about, many of us are doing, and that's the idea of a temporary layoff. So when we are in our car, listening to the radio, we often hear stories about layoffs. And what we're really hearing about are unionized environments. We're hearing about mill workers or all kinds of different industries where layoffs are, teachers, things like that, where unionized workforces allow for this type of thing. Everybody listening to this call today, I would imagine, does not work in a unionized environment or have employees in a unionized environment. And some of them might, but most of them won't. And so what that means is that we're dealing with the realm of employment law. And employment law is governed by the Employment Standards Act of BC, and then common law, which is judge-made law. In either one of those arenas, temporary layoffs are not really allowed. They're certainly not allowed in the common law. And under the Employment Standards Act, there is a provision that talks about and contemplates a temporary layoff, but only in 2 very isolated situations. One being that it's in your contract. And for those of us who have contracts, 99% of us will not have a temporary layoff provision in there. I have 2 employees and my contract doesn't have that in there. Mainly because people don't expect to be hired in an employment law context only to be laid off for a certain period of time. The Employment Standards Act provision talks about temporary layoff being a period of time of 13 weeks, not more than 13 weeks, inside of a 20-week consecutive period. So even if it is allowed, it's only for a short period of time. Otherwise, you're in breach of the legislation. The other situation, which may be more up for grabs for some people, is the idea that the employee has agreed to the temporary layoff, which then begs the question, what does agreement even really mean? If you approach your employee and say, I can either temporarily lay you off or I can let you go, and the employee takes temporary layoff, are they really agreeing to something? Do they really have a choice? And so we haven't seen a lot of, before COVID-19, this issue didn't come up a lot. I would imagine it's going to be, as soon as complaints start coming in, I'm sure they already have been coming in, we're going to see more decisions about how this is treated. But unless the employee agrees, it's really not legal. And so what happens when you are laying somebody off is you're actually terminating them, and that gives rise to damages for termination, essentially. Now, for many of us, it may just be that, well, you're between a rock and a hard place, and desperate times call for desperate measures. So that's what people are doing. And that's, I don't mean to bring this up to alarm anyone if they've already done it, because the reality is that most employees, if they're loyal to us, understand that this is something we had to do, and they're going to come back to work, that they'll have applied for the CERB, or they're maybe back to work because we're now qualifying for the wage subsidy. And so most employers will, quote unquote, get away with this. Not that the reason that they were doing it is because they were trying to get away with anything. They were just doing their best to get through a very difficult time. But just know that if you're contemplating layoffs, that technically speaking, they're not legal unless you fall under those 2 categories. One of the things that I've been telling my employer clients to do is to consider, and this was maybe a month ago when we were earlier on in this scenario, is to consider giving employees working notice of the fact that they were going to be laid off. And so what you're doing is minimizing the amount of severance or pay in lieu of notice that they would be entitled to when you so it'd be saying, hey Jane, as of April 1st, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to let you go for a period of time. And so what you've done already, and you've given them notice ahead of time, and that, that can work. Working notice doesn't always work because people can become really disgruntled, but I'm finding in these times, people are understanding about what their employers are going through and what the decisions they have to make. And one of the biggest things, and Tanja talked about it, is just communicating with our employees. The more transparent we can be with our employees about what's happening and what we're planning and what's happening for us to a reasonable level, I think is really helping. Certainly we don't want to alarm our employees and start showing them financial statements, and there's a line there, but sitting down with them and saying, yeah, you know what, the phone has stopped ringing and we're really slow on work. I know we're going to come back to life when this is all done in a few weeks from now, but for right now, there's some challenges, and let's talk about it, because employees know what's happening anyway. So to pretend that it's not happening, I think is really disingenuous. If that's a word, I don't know. So I think that's probably all I want to touch on in the first slide. Maybe going to the next one. This is happening quite a bit. So when employees are refusing to come to work, and this can be in non-pandemic times, we come across situations where employees don't show up for work, and sometimes that can amount to resignation, or what we call in employment law abandonment of employment. So they just disappear and we don't hear from them for a week, and suddenly they're back. So the question I've had many times over the last couple of months is, well, can my employee just choose to not be coming to work because there's a pandemic? And of course, the legal answer to that is it depends. And there's a whole bunch of situations where that might be the case, that they can refuse to come to work. So I thought there's probably 25 if I sat down and thought about it long enough, but I thought I would just kind of touch on a handful of the ones that I'm seeing are the most common. The first one being, of course, that they're sick with COVID-19, or they're sick with symptoms related to what looks like COVID-19. And so as we know, we've heard in the news that we don't need a sick note for that. All we need to do is say, oh, I'm coughing, I have a fever, I can't come to work. And of course, provincial authorities don't want everyone running to the doctor to get a note, because that's just going to spread the virus even more. And so employees are allowed to just simply self-declare they have symptoms, and employers, in my view, are just mandated to recognize that there's that 14-day isolation period. So that one's easy. And frankly, I don't know what employer would be saying, yeah, come on, you need to come in anyway. You know, who wants them at work? The other one would be if there's a doctor's note. Let's say we have people who have pre-existing health conditions and perhaps they're more vulnerable, or there's other things happening for them. So the employer or the doctor has said, look, this person just shouldn't be at work. And again, that's an accommodation issue that would arise and brings up all kind of human rights obligations on the employer. So that's another one. A third one would be many of us are now homeschooling children. And small children who can't be at home without supervision, of course, where do we put them? And so many employees are having to be home with their kids. And this is a big one right now. Legally speaking, there needs to be some accommodation. However, the employee needs to show some kind of effort to find alternative care for their kids. What does that even really look like? You know, can grandma and grandpa help? Well, maybe grandma and grandpa don't want to be, you know, they're self-isolating. So it's really complicated. I would say that wherever possible, most of us are we're just accommodating. But just know that that one's really kind of complicated. If you're choosing for some reason that you're trying to make someone work when they're saying they can't, maybe that's one of those places where you want to check with legal counsel about it. The other one would be, and this is one that's coming up a lot, is where the employee says, well, I don't feel safe at work. It's not safe for me to be there. And that one, again, is it can be complicated. Most employers have put in, excuse me, really good safety measures at work, and they've made sure that there's things to keep employees safe. And so we then get into this tug of war of the employee saying, well, I don't feel like it's safe enough. If you actually get into a tug of war like that with your employee, you can get work safe prevention officers, I think they're called, involved if it becomes that important. And they'll actually do an assessment of the workplace and decide whether or not it's safe for someone to be there or not. And if the prevention officer decides that it is safe and the employee just doesn't come into work, and I'm thinking mostly these are people that were difficult to begin with, perhaps, then that can be seen technically as abandonment of employment if they don't show up. So that's probably a one-off. Maybe moving to the last slide, because of course this is how I roll and I'm gonna have to run through it quickly, is legalities from working from home. So this is a fun one. You know, as Tanya said, many of us are trying to work from, I'm happily not home today, I'm in my office, because if I was at home, there'd be a barking dog, an 8-year-old who needs me to help her with math knocking at the door, even though I said not to knock at the door, and all of you know, a husband who's like, what's for dinner? So we're all dealing with different scenarios. And a quote that I saw recently that I loved, it was a whole article actually, it said, we're not all in the same boat. We are in the same storm, different boats. And so I think as employers, we need to understand that if someone's working from home, we have no idea what they're dealing with. And in some cases we might know, or they might share it with us, but in some cases we might not know, or we might not want to know. And it's about really just easing up on what we're expecting from our employees, and knowing that they're probably doing their best, and to just give a little and trust them a little bit more, even though it's maybe not our first instinct to just allow people to be rather unsupervised. And here's the, I guess, the push and pull of it is that WorkSafe has always had rules about working from home and guidelines. They've recently kind of updated those guidelines. And what they're really saying is this: yeah, you know what? It's a really good idea for people to keep safe and work from home if they can. But what you should have as a minimum is a set of policies that talk about what that looks like. And policies can be, you know, 1 page to 10 pages. I recommend a shorter, kind of more succinct policy. And what they want is a couple things. They want to make sure that the employee has done like a hazard check of wherever they're working, and to sort of submit a type of report. And I would say that if you're an employer who has employees at home, keep a record of that, even if it's just as simple as, yep, my office is safe. I have a home office on the second floor of my house. You want to make sure that you have a way of contacting them. You want to make sure they have a way of contacting you, and you want to make sure that they're checking in. There's a whole bunch of regulations on check-in that I would bore you with if I went through them today. The best thing you can do if you're wanting to set up some policies is to either talk to your HR provider. If you don't have one, there's Tanya right here who could help you. And then the other way of doing it is you could just, but you could also Google WorkSafe BC, work from home, and their guidelines are there. Take a read through it. And it gives you some direction on, you know, ergonomics, emergency procedures, and checking in with, your supervisor. And I guess the last thing I would just say is that, you know, this isn't going to last forever, but the cool thing about it is that many of us are learning about different efficient ways of working. And perhaps when, you know, we all go back to a new sort of settled version of reality, maybe we'll be looking at more flexible ways of allowing our employees to do their job. And I think that's a great thing, especially for women. That's it.
Wow. Thank you, Charlene. You know, just some great advice there, and some tips, both legal and managing as a female employee, a female entrepreneur, and juggling, all the juggling that everyone does. But some of those tips on being transparent with your employees, you know, checking out if you do have contracts, what's there, you know, if you don't have contracts, you know, what could you do now to begin to put some of those things in place? You know, it's maybe it's never too late to be looking at some of those things. But, you know, keeping people safe and checking and all of those pieces are great tips for our audience today. So thank you, Charlene. And no, we're not all in the same boat. I love that. You know, we're in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. So understanding, and as Tanya has said as well, you know, understanding different people's situations. Great advice. This is your opportunity, our audience, to ask questions of our panelists. Are there things that you're wondering about that that Tanya or Charlene may be able to help you with this? I was going to say this afternoon. It still is morning, this morning. So please do go on to our chat, and Carrie Lee is going to moderate the Q&A.
Great, Dawn, I have a question that came in from another Melanie on the session today. And she's asking, what advice do you have for employers who have employees that are asking for a layoff so they can stay at home and take advantage of the CERB benefit? So they're asking for a layoff, but you might need them to be at work. What happens there? What are the ramifications, or how can somebody handle that?
I would just say that's a common question that we've heard a lot from clients, where they're frustrated because the employee would rather stay home and get the $2,000 a month CERB, which has since been, you can earn up to $1,000 additional income, but they would just rather stay home than work.
Yeah. Charlene, would you like to take that first, and then I'll follow up with the people in culture response? Because I think this is a double question here.
It's a double.
Yeah, so I typically I do, most of my work is with employer clients. And so this one, and because I'm an employer myself, and I have two really hardworking employees who are just lovely, loyal, dedicated people. So these kinds of situations, they aggravate me a little bit, because I'm assuming that the question is coming from a place where somebody is just wanting to take advantage of something. And really what that's doing is putting the employer in a really precarious situation, because it's asking the employer to actually provide a record of employment that's not true. and to be laid off and to represent to Service Canada that that they've been laid off, when in fact that's not what's happened. And so, of course, this situation, if you start putting facts into this situation, it really is going to turn into it depends. But I would say generally that employers need to be following really what they're mandated to do, which is provide a record of employment with integrity, with what is truthfully what's going on. And so if it's not the employer requesting them to be off and it's really the employee, well, then that's a resignation in my view. And they may not like that. I think that then turns to that question where they say, well, I just, it's going to turn into an argument. Well, I just don't feel safe at work. Well, we're an essential service, right? So we've put everything into place that we can. And I guess it's one of those things where someone could be having major mental health issues and they're just really afraid of being anywhere right now. And if that's the case, well then, we care about that employee and we want to help them. And so maybe it is a health issue and it's kind of a more rounded health issue. So maybe Tanja can speak more to the softer side of that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, absolutely. Do we need to accommodate our employees? Yes, we do, right? But I think, this is a really good time to find out what's at the root of their question. That would be my first thing. So why are they asking? What's happening? And if it is truly a financial issue, right, there's different ways to handle that. So one of my not-for-profit clients is actually offering $3 an hour more to people who stay, and they're considering it hero pay. Love that, right? That's absolutely fantastic. But I think it's also about helping your employees understand the reason why, helping them, using language like, okay, listen, we're all in this together, right? We're all in this together. This is what it means, and then taking them down the path. If I were to say yes to you, right, which ethically I can't due to everything that you said, Charlene, right? And I think absolutely you need to be straight and honest about that, but you need to help them understand what the result of that is or the unintended consequences. The other thing too, though, is, as an employer, there's lots of programs now. So there's the 75% reimbursement and things like that. And I think, there's also the CERB, of course. So people will say, well, I stay at home for $2,000 or I come to work for $2,500. Well, why show up? So what I would say that is, I'm hoping that this is a time for us as employers to regroup, to make sure that we have a culture that is consistent throughout every day, so that people do feel like we're all in this together, and people know the purpose and the why of what, why they're working, and to connect to the mission, vision, values, purpose of the organization. When we have that, and I will say that when we have that on a day-to-day and people feel cared about as a person, most of the time people won't ask that question. So there's a lot there, but I'm always about proactive, right? It's like, okay, if somebody's asking that question, how did we get here? And how do we make sure we're not there in the future?
Yeah, and as a follow-up to that, I'm going to point this to you, Charlene. So understanding what Tanja just said, and you want them to want to come back and work for you. Now we have a question from Alicia saying that they provided the temporary laid off, right? Gave them the applicable ROE a month ago, and now she's recalling them and they don't want to come back because they're making more on the EI CERB benefit. So what are the next steps and obligations as an employer? So, from that legal standpoint, what rates do they have?
Ooh, good one. Anytime I'm giving advice to anybody, I always want to know what their goal is. So this is an interesting question, but I would be asking Alicia, is this someone you want to have back? Is this somebody who matters to your organization? Because if they do, again, going back to what Tanja is saying, we got to get to the root of why that's happening. People are mostly not motivated by money, usually. And so, that could be a whole other webinar on what motivates employees and what makes them feel loyal to their organization. So if we went back and said to Alicia, well, what's your goal here? And if the goal is, well, I really need her back, and she doesn't seem to understand that, and I feel like she's perhaps taking advantage of this. Well, is this really an employee we want? If it's not, I would say that this employee is technically, and I'm not saying this is legal advice to Alicia right now because I'd have to know the facts, but generally speaking, I would say that unless the person comes back, they're technically resigning. You've got a job for them to come back to and they're not coming back to work. That would look something like resignation or job abandonment if they're not coming back. So a really precarious situation that you'd want to be careful about. And I don't pitch legal advice unless I think you actually need it. But I think in that case, you'd want to be careful before you do something like that. But again, you know, I'm always comparing it to people that work for me. But if someone said, well, I don't want to come back to work, that would rub me the wrong way. So unless there was a really good reason, like Tanya said, and we'd have to get to the root of that, if they're just wanting to sit at home instead, that would bother me. And I would consider, you know, what that really means. I think most people are coming back to work because people enjoy being at work and they want to make sure they have a job when all this is done too, right? So yeah, that's a long-winded answer to a
well, and I'll add to that. So if that employee said that to me, listen, I don't really want to come back to work. What I would say is help me understand your reasoning. Help me understand the reasons why that you don't want to come back to work. And I would pause. And if they said, look, this is purely financial, then I would say, you know, I totally understand that. And this is difficult financially for everybody. And what we have done as an organization is we've done our best to support everybody. The government is supporting with funds. But really what I'm saying is, you know, you're a valuable employee. I need your strengths at the table. I need you to come back. And if that person ultimately says, look, I can't come back, then I would say, well, then I suppose we need to look at our options. So are you saying that you're not coming back and you're resigning your position? Or what are you saying? Help me understand. Help me understand what your position is and what you're saying right now. And maybe let's have a conversation about that.
Great.
Yeah, I would just add, when I'm on the calls with the federal government, they've responded to questions like this, and they very clearly said that the employee needs to be laid off, so there's no work. They get that ROE, as Charlene has said. And when there is work to come back to, they are obligated to go back. They can't make the choice to stay on CERB or EI or not.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And I think the important thing for us is just to understand, like, holistically what's going on for them, so that we can, because that might be happening for other people too. And I might say that this type of situation might uncover things that were going sideways in our organizations that we didn't know about, right? So it's, listen, before I left, this was happening. I'm not sure I can come back to that. Okay, good to know. Let's address that and make sure that you come back to an ideal situation. So I think if we use language like help me understand, then we can really get to the root of what's going on. Yeah. Thanks, Melanie.
Excellent advice. That it's a conversation.
Yeah.
Great. We have another question. Charlene mentioned layoff clauses not typically found in employment contracts outside of unionized environments. And they're asking if there's recommendations to start adding some content around this moving forward, or is that still concerning regarding common and employment law? So again, about that layoff clause in an employment contract.
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about as well going forward. You know, are we all going to have pandemic clauses now in our commercial contracts and leases and employment contracts? I think more holistically, this is going to change the way we look at many things. And it might change legislation. We're going to have new case law. We're at the beginning of this. I don't know that I know the answer to that at this point. I think, would it be good practice to consider these types of clauses in contracts going forward that comply and look like what the Employment Standards Act says? Yeah, not a bad idea. The idea being that you cannot contract out of minimum legislation for the protection of workers. So you can't create a contract that says something that limits a basic right. So starting with what the Employment Standards Act says, you could look at that and you could say, you know, in the case of circumstances that are out of the control of the employer, the employer has the right and discretion to temporarily lay off the employee in accordance with the legislation at that time. Don't put that in your contract exactly, but that might be what it sounds like. It might sound like referring to that. And then what's happening is you're then creating a contractual right to rely on the legislation. But I wouldn't be attempting to override it or create anything else, because in collective agreements and unionized environments, they can create kind of whatever they want, because the Employment Standards Act is sort of there to guide, but they have their own collective agreements. So something like that might hold water, and it might not be bad practice, but I can tell you that I haven't started doing that yet. And maybe I should, I don't know. I just haven't turned my mind to that yet. We're just trying to get through this first.
And another comment came in from Jennifer, just in regards to the CERB and how we're talking with our employees about that $2,000 benefit that they can get. There was a change between now and when they launched the program that people can earn up to $1,000 a month, right? So some employees might not be aware of that as well. And I don't know if you guys can answer this, or even Melanie, you might have the answer, but I have people asking me, because they are solopreneurs, reporting only that business income, right? No dividend, no formal payroll. Looking at that income, are they taking what we would assume to be their net income, their taxable income? Is that what they can earn $1,000, or is it of their gross sales? Thinking an example of somebody that sells completely online. They were selling, $4,000 or $5,000 a month. Now they're under maybe 2,000, but is it that net income, or because their gross is over 1,000? I don't know if anybody can answer that question today, but it's one I've been asked a couple times.
I can ask that question to the federal government, because I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I think most of the numbers are using our gross numbers right now, like for everything else. So I would assume that, because when you have a business and you're working with net, you have a lot of control to manipulate those numbers and make it look like you're really not making anything. So I would say, from what we've already seen, that, and it's probably a gross number, but I don't know.
Okay,
I believe it is as well. I believe it is as well, because there wouldn't be a way to make sure that was fair for everybody, right? People manage their businesses a different way. So if somebody's paying 32% a year, or 26% or 50%, right, depending on income, there would be no way to equalize that. So I believe I read somewhere now, and Melanie, I think that's great that you're going to check and follow up, but I believe I read somewhere that it was gross earnings, or for sole proprietor businesses, their billings at the time of billing. So if I bill April 15th, it counts towards April 15th, as opposed to when I collect, it's about when I bill, I believe.
I wanted to just if you don't mind, I wanted to just make one comment. Those questions that Melanie was addressing earlier before we jumped into, I wanted to just jump into the wage subsidy and make a couple comments. One, make sure you know that it's a taxable benefit. So that's huge. The second is, yes, this wage subsidy will apply to new employees as long as they are non-arm's length. So as long as it's not hiring your spouse or hiring your son to work for you. So you can hire new employees, but it can't be family members. It can apply to family members, but that person had to have been working there before March 15th.
Okay, good follow-up. Thank you. And Dawn, if you want to wrap up here, we're right on time. We got a couple minutes left.
Okay. Wow, what a great discussion, and great questions, and wonderful answers that are practical and pragmatic, and some good detail, and just so impressed with both of our panelists today. Strength in Numbers is a webinar series that Women's Enterprise Center has put together for you to share with our participants throughout British Columbia. We couldn't do it without people like Charlene Cleary and Tanja Halsall. Our panelists today who have showed their expertise, information that we can all move forward with, because we are moving forward. Our whole next session is about momentum. There is an end, it will be an end to this pandemic. No one knows when. Everything that you do when you're working on your business will get you to a better result when it's all over. So thank you for participating today. We've got some upcoming webinars. They're all provided through Women's Enterprise Center free of charge. Check out our website. Check out our business loans information session, and stay tuned. Thank you for joining us, and a special hats off to our panelists today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And everyone will be receiving a follow-up with all the contact info for Tanja and Charlene, and links to the information that was provided today. And thanks, Carrie Lee and Melanie.
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists. That was really super.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye. Have a great day.
You too. Bye, guys.